Hey kids, History Channel guy here. So for today's video, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, and I'm going to be doing a presidential tier list video. This has been long requested by members of the community, and I just wanted to thank everyone for 1,000 subscribers. And to kick off the new year, I thought this would be a great thing to do. But before I start, remember to like and subscribe. We're currently about 250 watch hours away from being able to monetize the channel, and I expect this video to be about 2 hours long. So we literally just need like 100 people to watch this video, and from start to finish, and we could monetize the channel. So if you could make sure you share the video with friends who might be interested, that would be excellent. And I'm gonna be doing the presidents in order, so if y'all want to skip around, see where I put certain presidents, we can do that. But yeah, here we go. Let's start. So obviously, to kick off our list, we have to do George Washington, who is going to be in the S tier. So I added a B plus tier because I feel like there are a lot of presidents that are Bs, and then some that are B pluses. But yep, George Washington, obviously the first president of the United States, and he played a key role in the American Revolutionary War. He led the Continental Army. He was able to help us secure independence from Great Britain, and he also helped draft and played a role in ratifying the Constitution. But what's also important is George Washington set the precedent to become president of the United States. So since Washington, he was a very humble man, and therefore he did many things to ensure that the presidency was a position that didn't hold too much power and too much sway. He intentionally didn't become a monarchy. He only ran for 2 terms, despite his constituents wanting him to run for a third term. Washington basically all he wanted to do is just live in Mount Vernon, Virginia, which was his home. And unfortunately, soon after his presidency, he died. But he also set the precedent for remaining neutral in wars, which he was actually criticized for, but it ended up being the right call. But at the time, France supported the United States during the Revolutionary War, so many in the United States felt that we kind of owed them to help them out a bit, but we didn't end up fighting in supporting France. But yeah, George Washington set the precedent. He also helped quell the Whiskey Rebellion, which was a rebellion that basically led to the the Articles of Confederation getting rid of. But yeah, there you go. That's George Washington, S tier. Certainly a very humble, good president. So then we're going to go to Washington's former vice president, if I can find him. Where's John Adams? There he is, John Adams. John Adams, he is a solid B-list president. My biggest issue with John Adams was obviously his signing of the Alien and Sedition Acts, which created a lot of criticism with him because it restricted the rights of his political opponents, and he also restricted immigrants coming into the country. But he was also criticized, like Washington, for not helping France in its various wars, but simultaneously, I believe that was actually a good thing. But another criticism of John Adams was the one who did the midnight judge appointments, which was obviously infamously John Marshall ended up being the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for decades after John Adams' presidency. And the reason why this happened was he lost the presidential election against Thomas Jefferson, and this was the first time that there was going to be a switching of parties. So George Washington didn't believe in political parties, and we probably should have listened to Washington. However, John Adams was the one who was the first kind of true Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican, and there was a switching of power. But you have to hand it to John Adams. He did peacefully transition power, which there was kind of up in the air whether he would do that or not. But at the same time, it was a little dictatory of him to do that with the midnight judge appointments. But yeah, overall, John Adams was a fantastic founding father, but as you can see, he's a pretty B-list president. Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson I know a lot of people are going to put him very low on their list. However, I'm going to put Thomas Jefferson as an A-list president. The reason for this is, first of all, is the purchasing of the Louisiana Territory from France was an excellent move. He basically led the way for the United States to expand. It literally doubled the size of the United States. He was also the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, and he was the anti leader of the Anti-Federalists, which in a lot of ways kind of showed the importance of states' rights and the importance of local autonomy over a strong federal government, which is what John Adams and Alexander Hamilton wanted. But the thing about Thomas Jefferson that a lot of people are going to put him lower on their list is, unfortunately, the slavery question when it came to Thomas Jefferson. Obviously, George Washington owned slaves, but Thomas Jefferson was the had a relationship, and some might say a rape, of one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, which he had multiple children with, but he also freed those children, which was part of the deal with Hemings. But I don't know, the jury's still out what was the deal with that relationship. I'm not going to say absolutely one way or the other. They're better scholars than I am who can debate that issue, but overall, Thomas Jefferson, I'm a big fan of Thomas Jefferson. Always have been. Another criticism of his was the James Callender stuff, but um, that also relates to the Sally Hemings issue, and I'm personally not in the boat that thinks that Thomas Jefferson had James Callender killed. But yep, there we go. Thomas Jefferson, there you go. A-list president. Louisiana Purchase, Declaration of Independence. You can't get much better than that. So we got James Madison next. So let me find James Madison. Technically, James Madison is the smallest president in U.S. history, with standing at 5'4". Where's the little guy? Okay. James Madison. He's not a B plus. He's an A-list here. I really admire James Madison because he was the president who led us through the War of 1812, and he was kind of criticized for it at the time. But the thing about James Madison is that it was a necessary war to occur because it was kind of like the United States' second War of Independence. It kind of solidified the United States as a real nation, and it kind of ensured that the British wouldn't try to retake the American territories because we did so well in the War of 1812. Obviously, Washington, D.C. was burnt. His wife, Dolly Madison, had to save the painting of George Washington, his famous presidential portrait, which is right there. But James Madison, very good president. He was another Democratic Republican. He kind of ensured that local autonomy would run supreme. But yeah, that's James Madison is a good president. I think he was definitely deserving of this A tier status, and another founding father. So James Monroe. James Monroe is a solid B plus tier. So I can't quite put him into the A tier. The only reason why is because he led us through a time of peace, but I also really respect James Monroe because he was the one who issued what's called the Monroe Doctrine. So the Monroe Doctrine basically declared that European powers would not interfere with the affairs of the Americas. So any countries in with the Americas, Europe was not to jump into those. And it was kind of controversial at the time because it kind of was the earliest example of American imperialism, and the fact that the United States would be in charge of all things when it comes to North and South America. But it also set the precedent of getting the colonial powers such as Spain, France, England, and Russia out of the United States. And you can see remnants of the Monroe Doctrine from as late as World War II. So, for instance, when Germany tried to invade Greenland, the United States sent troops to Greenland to try to push them out because Greenland's part of North America. We had the U.S. purchase of Alaska because of the precedent set by the Monroe Doctrine. And I really think it is an important precedent to set because without the precedent of the Monroe Doctrine, we would not have we would have European powers interfering in Latin America, and we'd have them interfering with South America, and it was just it could get so messy, and it would drag us into European wars. So if anything, it's kept the United States separate from European wars. So you really think about it, the only two European wars we were really involved in was World War One and World War Two, and those were, in my opinion, justified reasons. But yep, definitely a B plus tier. I like James Monroe. John Quincy Adams. So he's the son of John Adams, and I'm going to give John Quincy a C list. So John Quincy Adams, I do admire him because he did some early efforts to promote the abolition of slavery, which was controversial at the time. But I also simultaneously believe that John Quincy should have never been president. He won in what's called the corrupt bargain. So what happened is that he went against Andrew Jackson in the presidential election of oh Jesus, I think it was 1820. But he went against Andrew Jackson, and what occurred was Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, and technically the electoral college, but John Quincy, but there wasn't the majority. He didn't win the majority of delegates needed to become president. So by the constitutional rule, it goes to the House. But because John Quincy Adams was a very experienced politician, because he was kind of more the elitist. He's been working in politics since the Revolutionary War. He's probably the most experienced president in U.S. history, and he actually became a U.S. congressman after Andrew Jackson became president in the next cycle. But John Quincy Adams probably never should have been president. He lost by all measures of the count, and because of his being so embedded in the political system, he won the presidency. But I can't commend that, and yeah, pretty ineffective president. He was there for one term, and Andrew Jackson ended that, and he became like the populist leader. Andrew Jackson, next president, I'll give him a B plus tier. This is another controversial pick that many of you might disagree with. However, I guess I'll touch on the controversial side first. So, Jackson is very controversial because of his removal of the five civilized tribes to the of from southeastern North America to Oklahoma Territory in what's called the Indian Removal Act. But what we also need to remember is technically the Trail of Tears did not occur under Jackson's rule. So the Trail of Tears was actually under Van Buren's rule. So Van Buren was the president when that occurred, and most of the logistics either fell to the U.S. Army or Van Buren himself. So Jackson had nothing to do with the Trail of Tears when it came to the actual Trail of Tears. He set the plans, but the Native Americans actually lobbied towards Van Buren to basically to ensure that the Trail of Tears would not happen, and Van Buren basically said, no, you have to move. So that ultimate call came to Van Buren. Andrew Jackson, I commend Andrew Jackson because he started what's known as Jacksonian democracy. So he wanted to get rid of patronage politics, and he did an excellent job of ending some of the corrupt systems, the corruption that actually got his predecessor, John Quincy Adams, elected president. But what's also interesting about Jacksonian democracy is it led to what's known as universal white male suffrage. So it eliminated the requirement for you to be a property owner to vote. So if you really think about it, I would say like 20-30% of America are property owners, but without Jackson, universal white male suffrage probably wouldn't have happened for at least another couple decades. So Jackson single-handedly ensured that that like 90% of Americans can vote now. So it's crazy how much he did for voters' rights. But Andrew Jackson, I think he was a very good president. Obviously, a war hero. In the Battle of New Orleans, he was known for that, even though technically the War of 1812 was over. But that's a story for another day. So, yep, you got Andrew Jackson there. Beg your pardon. This is gonna be a long video, so I'm just drinking some water. So, So now we need to go to Van Buren. So Van Buren is a D-list president. I've kind of already touched on it already, but Van Buren was responsible for the Trail of Tears because he had the final authority on that. So he also, a lot of people like to attribute it to Jackson. I'm in a different camp, but he also led to the Panic of 1828, which was because he would veto a bill that would reestablish the Second Bank of the United States, and that was controversial, but it was kind of seen as a threat to the financial system of the United States. But Van Buren, pretty crappy president. I'm not the biggest fan of Van Buren in the world, especially for the Native American stuff. But what also I don't like about Van Buren is he basically was charged with continuing Jacksonian democracy, but in reality, he did very little to continue it. But Van Buren, a fun fact about Van Buren is that he was the only president in U.S. history where English was not his first language. So it's a little bit of bar trivia for you. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison also goes in the D tier. The issue with William Henry Harrison is really he was unable to do that much when he was president, just because he died like a month into office. So the story goes that he had the longest inauguration speech of all time, and this speech went on for hours and hours. And during the speech, it was raining, and the dumbass didn't wear a coat. So William Henry Harrison, I actually have a friend who that was like his great 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 grandfather, and he's actually named Harrison because of William Henry Harrison. But yeah, that's William Henry Harrison. He really wasn't in office long enough to do anything, but there we go. John Tyler. So this was William Henry Harrison's vice president at the time, and the biggest accomplishment John Tyler had was John Tyler basically was the one who set the precedent for what vice presidents were going to do. So at the time, there's a lot of ambiguity with the U.S. Constitution for what a vice president was supposed to do. But John Tyler, being a shrewd and capable politician, he basically set the precedent that as vice president, you become president. It's not the president, the vice president acting as president. You're not going to have a special election. The vice president automatically becomes the president. And this precedent that he set was also very good, considering this is the first time in U.S. history where this would happen. And it's excellent that this didn't occur when, even though technically Zachary Tyler died in office, but this didn't occur when Lincoln was president. Imagine if the first presidential death in American history was Abraham Lincoln. Well, then we would have a constitutional crisis on our hands. So it's very good that John Tyler, in America's earliest history, was the one who set the precedent for what a VP would eventually become a president. But yep, good on John Tyler doing that. Other than that, he really didn't do much in office, and arguably he died a traitor because he was elected to the Confederate Congress in 1861, and he was supposed to hold office starting in 1862, but he died in 1862. But yeah, he died a member of the Confederacy, and he was a president. So let that sink in. So next we got James K. Polk, wherever he is. There he is. And this might surprise a couple of y'all, but I love James K. Polk. I think James K. Polk was an excellent president. He's probably the best president between Jefferson and Lincoln. James K. Polk was obviously the 11th president of the United States, and he's best known for the annexation of Texas, which was a huge deal. That was one of his campaign promises, and another thing about James K. Polk is that he promised to only run for president for one term, and he kept that promise. He died very shortly after his presidency. But yeah, James K. Polk, also known for settling the boundary dispute with Great Britain, which was a huge deal at the time. And yeah, Annexation of Texas, that's sick, and the boundary dispute for the Oregon Territory. That's two very big territorial acquisitions for the United States, and all of that can be contributed to James K. Polk. So, good on him. We have Zachary Taylor next. Let me find him. The General Zachary Taylor. So Zachary Taylor, another D-list president, very ineffective president. So, fun fact about Zachary Taylor is prior to him running for president of the United States, he was a war hero in the Mexican-American War. But therefore, he was very inactive in politics, meaning he literally did not vote in a single election before running for office. This is the only time in American history that's ever happened. But both the Whigs and the Democrats asked Zachary Taylor to be their nominee, and he picked the Whigs basically for an electoral advantage. But Zachary Taylor was so ineffective. He basically got nothing done when he was president, and a lot of that can be contributed to him attempting to just kick the can on the slavery question, and he played a significant role in growing the tensions leading up to the American Civil War, despite wanting to settle the issue due to his ineffectiveness and frankly his political inexperience, which can be expected because literally the man's never voted before. He's a general, he's a war hero. His cabinet was very ineffective, but yeah, he is a pretty bad president. So let's see here. Millard Fillmore should be next. Let's see. Millard Fillmore, F. Many of you probably have never even heard of Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore is, at the time, was the worst president in American history. So Millard Fillmore's biggest controversial act was his signing of the Fugitive Slave Act, which required to return runaway slaves to their owners. And this was a direct violation of not only civil liberties, but states' rights. So what would happen is that there were these northern free states, and obviously as a free state, slavery is not legal. But what's the law stated is that these northern states would not be allowed to have their own laws, because they would have to listen to the laws of the South, which said that you have to return runaway slaves. But in these northern states, they're free. So what not only happened is the Underground Railroad would have to expand to Canada, so you'd have to go all the way to Canada for freedom. But overnight, these people, sometimes generations of people, would have to get sent back south because technically they're runaway slaves, despite presumptively gaining their freedom. There's an annoying car in the background. I love those stupid little cars with the dumb engines, but that's besides the point. But yeah, generations, some families of people would have to be transported back to slavery and presumably to be tortured because they ran away. But yeah, slave catchers could start going north and acting with virtual impunity. And what also happened is a lot of freed black men would also get captured, and because it was presumed that any black man up north was a runaway slave. Excuse me. Franklin Pierce is next. Where is he? There he is. Franklin Pierce was obviously the hottest president at that time. He was at the time the youngest president in American history, but as you can see, he's another D-list president. The issue with Franklin Pierce is he expanded slavery to new territories, especially the Western territories, and he played a significant role in leading to the tensions of the Civil War. Some other things about Franklin Pierce is he was known for his support of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was popular sovereignty. Obviously, the Missouri Compromise did not work. So the new theory by men such as Franklin Pierce and his administration was the Kansas and Nebraska Act would basically ensure that states would vote whether they like slavery or not, and it led to Bleeding Kansas, which a lot of historians say was the lead up to the Civil War. I'm certainly in that boat as well, but one of the lead ups to the Civil War was this, because what would happen is um, the pro slavery people from Missouri would go to Kansas, and then the anti slavery people from northern states like Illinois would go to Kansas as well, and they'd end up fighting each other to try to sway the vote to ensure that new states such as Kansas were ended up being free states. But yeah, it was a pretty disgusting, terrible time in America's history, and a lot of this can be traced back to Franklin Pierce, who, again, like every single president, just kept kicking the can down for the institution of slavery. James Buchanan's arguably the worst president in American history. He was the president right before Lincoln, and he allowed for the expansion of slavery, and he was widely criticized as being the contributing factor of the Civil War. And what's also interesting is James Buchanan's James Buchanan's Secretary of War, John B. Floyd, was transporting hundreds of thousands of guns to the South, which was insane to think about. That in preparation, this was after Lincoln was elected, that in preparation for a civil war, and John B. Floyd being a Southerner, he would literally transport thousands of guns to the South, which is just crazy to think about. But yeah, James Buchanan, terrible American president. Yeah, I have nothing but bad things to say about James Buchanan, and especially because he basically was a Southern sympathizer, and he was also just ineffective in office. He basically did nothing to try to quell any of the possibilities of civil war, and it was essentially up to the Lincoln administration to solve the issues. Honest Abe, S list. I think this goes without saying. Abraham Lincoln was an awesome president. In my opinion, the best president in American history. But there are some controversial sides to Lincoln, including the suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War, but that allowed for them to arrest and detain political opponents without charge, and it was seen as a violation of civil liberties. But other than that, Lincoln was the man who preserved the Union, and we need to remember that Lincoln was the man who preserved the Union, and he led us out of the Civil War. And at certain points, Lincoln thought that he would not win re-election in the presidential election of 1864. Some historians argue that if it happened in August instead of November, then Lincoln would have lost the presidential election. But yeah, it's Lincoln, S list. This might be my only two S lists. I really don't know yet. I haven't really thought about it too much past this, but certainly, in my opinion, the best president in American history. Andrew Johnson, another F list. It's kind of crazy that the two worst presidents in American history happened before and directly after the best president in U.S. history. Excuse me, I just yawned. Yeah, Andrew Johnson was terrible. So Johnson was never meant to be president. Prior to the Lincoln administration, Lincoln's first vice president, who served with him from 1861 to 1864, was a man named Hannibal Hamlin. So Hamlin was a Northern Republican like Lincoln himself, and because Lincoln kind of knew that the Civil War was coming to an end, he wanted to preach a message of unity. So Andrew Johnson was a Southern Democrat from Tennessee, and he was actually the only Southern Democrat to keep his Senate seat while his state rebelled. So Lincoln thought that was very admirable, and that Johnson would be the perfect reuniter of both the North and South. So he was seen as like a symbolic vice president, but obviously Lincoln didn't know that Lincoln didn't know that he was going to die, obviously. So we had no idea that Andrew Johnson was going to become president. The first president to be impeached in American history. He was literally one vote away in the Senate from getting kicked out of office. But he was a Southern sympathizer, obviously being a Southern Democrat from Tennessee, and he did acts like granted amnesty to all the Southern generals and Southern political leaders. He ensured that blacks were not able to get the rights, their constitutional rights that they've gained. He eliminated any possibility of giving newly freed slaves any monetary gain. We always hear of like the 40 acres and a mule. Andrew Johnson slashed those plans. Yeah, he was just a terrible president. And if Hamlin would have been vice president, Lincoln probably still would have won the election of 1864. And just think about how different the world would be if Andrew Johnson was not president, instead Hamlin was president, or better yet, if Lincoln was president. African Americans could have been set decades and decades further than what they got, and it took centuries to about a century for them to catch up because of Andrew Johnson. So, my opinion, Andrew Johnson, let's just put him there, worst president in American history. He sucked. Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant is a B plus, and in my opinion, Ulysses S. Grant is one of the most underrated presidents in American history. So, because of Andrew Johnson's terrible policies, the Ku Klux Klan started to regain prominence in the South again. And the issue is that basically because they could run with impunity, these African Americans were not given the same levels of rights under Johnson's administration. But Grant started to give them protections, and he did things like creating the Freedmen's Bureau. He basically ensured that African Americans would start to get their constitutional rights back. And the reason why Grant is not considered one of the best presidents in American history, why he's not in the A and the S tier, is that his administration got bogged down, and as a result, his presidency got bogged down by, the amount of corruption that his administration had. And the thing is that Grant, he was very inexperienced politically. We saw this with Zachary Taylor as well. He was a general. He was not a shrewd politician. He was not like Lincoln. Lincoln was probably one of the shrewdest politicians of all time. So his cabinet took advantage of him, and as a result, there's constant scandals, constantly going around all the time. And yeah, Grant could have been one of the United States' greatest presidents, and unfortunately, he was never given the opportunity to become the great leader that he showed in the Civil War. So I'm going to take another drink here. It's been a long video. Not even halfway done either. Sorry, my girlfriend just texted me. Okay, so Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes is another one of those terrible presidents, and I'm going to give Rutherford B. Hayes an F tier. So, all of the good work done by Ulysses S. Grant was just thrown away by Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes was the one who basically he didn't win the Electoral College, and there was sort of a deal struck with him and the Democrats in Congress. So what happened is the deal was that if Rutherford B. Hayes agreed to remove federal troops from the South, which was preventing things like the KKK from gaining prominence again, something Ulysses S. Grant also did, then he would win the presidency. Rutherford B. Hayes wanted to be president. He said yes. Terrible, terrible, terrible decision. That is just the root of selfishness, and it's disgusting to me that that we could have helped the newly freed slaves in the Reconstruction South, and because of that, that's when you start to see all of the Jim Crow laws and the black codes. This all happened under Rutherford B. Hayes' presidency, and it's despicable. It's absolutely despicable. Ulysses S. Grant gave African Americans a chance, gave freedmen a chance, and Rutherford B. Hayes just threw it all away, and that's just a despicable act. So Rutherford B. Hayes, he deserves to be in the F tier. Just a shitty president in general. So let's see who is next. I think Garfield is next. Yes. James A. Garfield. Where is he? They have Cleveland twice. That's hilarious. We'll get to that eventually. James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield could have been one of the best presidents in American history. So the issue with James A. Garfield is that obviously he was shot very early in his presidency. Yeah, so he was killed by a man named Charles Guiteau, and the issue is that he thought that Garfield owed him something. It was like a stupid consulship to Chile or something like that. But Garfield was known as probably the smartest president in American history. Um, sorry. He could. It was said that he could write Latin in his left hand and Greek in his right. So Garfield could have been an excellent president. Could have righted the wrongs that many of his predecessors did, but unfortunately, he was killed at too young of age. And ironically, um, let's see. Ironically, he could have lived if the bullet, if the doctors left the bullet, um, if the doctors just left the bullet, in there. So the thing about that is that he was on like a metal spring bed or something, and they used a metal detector to try to find where the bullet is, and obviously the genius is it's on a metal spring bed, so they couldn't find where the bullet was, so the doctor just kept digging all into Garfield's back. But yeah, he did a lot of good things in his short time as presidency. Reformed the civil services, and which was controversial in Congress at the time, because one of the main points of being in Congress was to be able to get jobs for your sons and daughters. But yeah, yeah, Garfield, it sucks. Born in Ohio as well, but that stinks. Chester A. Arthur. There's not much for me to say about Chester A. Arthur. He's just certainly one of those presidents that was useless. Prior to becoming president, he served as the customs collector for the Port of New York, which was one of the most prominent jobs in government in the world, because a lot of people don't know this, but prior to the Civil War, there wasn't an income tax. So the way that the federal government would make most of their money was through tariffs. So the Port of New York had the most imports and exports in the world, and therefore they had a ton of tariffs coming in. So this was literally in charge of that. So you were in charge of most of the most of the tax revenue in the U.S. government. He also continued a lot of Garfield's plans to reform the civil service and kind of get rid of patronage politics. But other than that, he really didn't do much. So Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland, solid C list. I'm going to put both the Clevelands there. It's because the reason why Cleveland is put twice is because he's the only president in U.S. history to lose a term and then get reelected. So he lost to Benjamin Harrison and then he came back. But we'll get to Benjamin Harrison in a second. But Grover Cleveland, he also did something a little creepy where he married a woman who was like 22 years younger than him. So he's one of those guys. But really not much for me to say about Grover Cleveland. He is just another one of those presidents who basically did nothing while in office. I'm gonna say it sounds so repetitive, but he helped reform the civil servants and tried to establish the modern day bureaucracy of the United States. But literally every president since Grant started that quest, and you can see how corrupt the U.S. government used to be, considering it took this many presidents. It literally took 4 presidents for the civil service to finally be professionalized and not be based on patronage politics. Benjamin Harrison, another pretty useless president. He's a D-list, so he's mostly known for promoting protective tariffs, which I could go into the details about, but I don't feel like falling asleep during this video. But instead, I'll tell you about how Benjamin Harrison was the first president in U.S. history to have electricity installed in the White House. So Benjamin Harrison was actually afraid of electricity, which is kind of hilarious saying out loud. But the issue with Benjamin Harrison was he would leave the lights on in the White House, and he would either order a servant to or a servant or a butler to turn it off for him, and if no one was around, he would literally let the lights just burn out. So the White House would cost the tax dollars so much money just leaving the lights on constantly at because Benjamin Harrison was terrified of the lights. But yeah, Benjamin Harrison, there's really not much else for me to say about him. Yeah, pretty ineffective president. William McKinley. I'm gonna give McKinley a B. McKinley is certainly a president who we don't really talk about as much because his vice president ended up being the cool guy, if you know what I mean. I'll get to that in a second, but yeah, he did some pretty cool things when it came to expanding the United States, which were controversial at the time, but I really think were the right call. So, for instance, he annexed Hawaii. Prior to that, he wanted to protect American pineapple exports and tropical fruit exports. So the way to do that was to annex Hawaii, which in the long run was a very good move. Hawaii was our 50th state. We have some of our most strategic Pacific naval bases in Hawaii, and it gives us a presence in the Pacific Ocean. So I think that's going to be a vital, vital thing to have, especially as America expands into the next couple centuries. But yeah, Willie McKinley helped do that. He was also responsible for starting the Spanish American War, which was controversial at the time, but again, I think was the right move. Because of the precedent set by the Monroe Doctrine, we needed to have some sort of presence in ensuring that the European powers got out of Latin America. So at the time, Spain was still in charge of Cuba. Cuba is literally like 50 miles, like it's like an hour boat ride from the tip of Florida. So having a Spanish territory so close by was a direct violation of the Monroe Doctrine. And also, Spain kind of provoked us. They I think they killed American prisoners, which started an international conflict. So Willie McKinley certainly started that, and I'm glad that he started the Spanish American War and he annexed Hawaii. So as a result, he is a B-list president. Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt, I'm going to put in the A list. So Theodore Roosevelt, he is best known for being the president who established the National Park Service. Him and the Sierra Club did a lot, and I think his name was John Muir, did a lot of things when it came to preserving national resources. To add on to that, Teddy Roosevelt did a lot of good things when it came to ending trust in the United States. So that was a big thing when it came to Teddy Roosevelt. He is also credited for the construction of the Panama Canal. So the Panama Canal is a canal, obviously in Panama, but it allows for shipping to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And prior to the Panama Canal, it would take weeks and weeks and weeks because you'd either have to go through the Northwest Passage, which which was really not a feasible option just because of all the Arctic ice, or you'd have to go around and around South America to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific, or you'd have to literally go through the American heartland. Theodore Roosevelt eliminated that by creating the Panama Canal, and he put a 100-year lease on it for the United States. He's also just a notable badass. He was one of the Rough Riders, which were a bunch of American volunteers who fought in the Spanish-American War. And he's also known for being a progressive politician. So those are some really cool things. Yeah, I really like Theodore Roosevelt. He also acquired Guam. So, if you're from Guam and you're watching this video, you're part of the United States because of Theodore Roosevelt. And you could either love that or hate it. I really don't know. But yeah, go Guam. Let's see here. William Howard Taft. Where's the fat man? There he is. C list. William Howard Taft, I have some very interesting opinions on. So, William Howard Taft was supposed to be the predecessor, I mean the um directly in line to acquire the presidency. He was Theodore Roosevelt's vice president, kind of like how William McKinley had Theodore Roosevelt as vice president. I actually forgot to mention this. Theodore Roosevelt was never meant to be president. They kind of put him in the vice presidential role to kind of get rid of him, to make sure that he never touched any notable office. Is kind of like what was done with Andrew Johnson. What kind of seems that keeps biting people in the ass. Maybe you shouldn't put incompetent people in so close to power, even though Theodore Roosevelt ended up being an excellent president, but that's besides the point. But yeah, William Taft did not continue the progressive agenda which Theodore Roosevelt wanted him to continue, and as a result, unfortunately, Theodore Roosevelt had to run against William Howard Taft. The bathtub story is not true, by the way, but because Taft was the sitting president, and Theodore Roosevelt was coming back for the unprecedented third term, which was never done in American history until his nephew FDR did, but that's besides the point. That would be later down the line. But yeah, a lot of Americans saw Theodore Roosevelt going against William Howard Taft as a violation of Washington's precedent of only serving 2 terms. But he technically could do it because there wasn't a constitutional amendment. But William Howard Taft ended up winning the Republican nomination, and Theodore Roosevelt lost the Republican nomination. But instead of stepping away, Theodore Roosevelt ran what's called the Bull Moose Party, and it was one of the first notable third parties in American history, and it led to Woodrow Wilson winning the presidency. So William Howard Taft, if he would have just done his job, he would have not led to one of the worst presidents in American history being elected. So good job, Taft. But as implied earlier, Woodrow Wilson was fucking terrible. I hated Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is a terrible president, and you will not hear me saying any nice things about Woodrow Wilson. Okay. I guess because I'm a historian, I have to look at it at an objective stance, but here we go. So Woodrow Wilson, what did he do well? I guess he technically led the United States through World War One, despite saying that he was not going to enter World War One, and he literally campaigned on that. And then after winning re-election, he went into World War One. But that's beside the point. The Zimmerman telegram kind of forced him to do it. Whatever. That's fine. What I really hate about Woodrow Wilson is he allowed for the KKK to regain prominence. So Ulysses S. Grant killed the Klan, and Woodrow, they were kind of like this like taboo, like sort of out of the ordinary organization, and Woodrow Wilson led to the KKK regaining prominence in the United States. So you can see in the 1920s, if you look at a list of Confederate statues, the amount of statues rose drastically when Woodrow Wilson was president, because he supported organizations like the Daughters of the Confederacy, like these Confederate veterans groups. And a large part of that has to do with Woodrow Wilson. He was the last president in American history to grow up in a slave-owning household. Some of his earliest memories were of his mom tending the wounds of Confederate soldiers. So, yeah, Woodrow Wilson, bad president, and he lied about World War One. He allowed for the Klan to regain prominence, and he displayed The Birth of a Nation, which is one of the most racist films of all time, in the White House, and it basically showed that the KKK could come back. Let's see, Warren G. Harding. There he is. D-list president. Warren G. Harding is one of the presidents who indirectly led to the Great Depression. So a big part about Warren G. Harding was his his is him supporting what's called laissez-faire policy. So because of Warren G. Harding, many of the banks could basically do whatever they wanted when it came to policy. So this could be like the banks only held a tenth of the money required to for its citizens, and then they could do like loan practices or because of laissez-faire policies, stocks could lie on their books and stuff. So it created the tension, which would inevitably lead to the Great Depression and the 29 crash. So there's that. Also, he really just didn't do much when it came to civil rights or reforming the country. Many parts of the United States were still had dirt homes, had dirt floors, and they lived in poverty. And Warren G. Harding did very little to support that as a laissez-faire sort of president. Calvin Coolidge is next. There he is. Calvin Coolidge, I like Calvin Coolidge. Many of you will claim that Calvin Coolidge has the same issues that that Warren G. Harding have. However, I disagree with that completely because Calvin Coolidge set the precedent, which I think many presidents should start taking note of the precedent of doing nothing. So the thing about Calvin Coolidge was he basically did not want the United States to have this radical change. So as a result, Calvin Coolidge started to reduce government spending, and simultaneously, if he did not see an act as necessary, he would not enact it as president. He didn't want this like earth-shattering change for the United States. He just wanted to stabilize the boat. And after Warren G. Harding, you kind of needed the stabilizing of the boat. So I admire Calvin Coolidge for that, just because he was able to stabilize the boat, so to speak, for the presidency. And I think a lot of presidents should take note of that. So I'm going to get another drink of water real quick. It's a long video, guys. Remember to like and subscribe. Please watch the whole video. We're so close to being able to monetize the channel. Just keep watching. And yeah, Herbert Hoover's next. D-list. I feel like I have a lot of D-list presidents. Herbert Hoover is the president before the Great Depression, and his efforts in to address the Great Depression and its effects were deeply controversial. And what's also crazy is Herbert Hoover also dragged his feet on prohibition. So at the time Hoover was president, prohibition was in full swing, and as a result, organized crime in the United States was all around us, but he did very little to combat it. So Americans were just drinking bootleg alcohol, and instead of just getting rid of prohibition, it was a stupid law in the first place, and getting rid of prohibition and gaining the tax revenue from it, he kind of dragged his heels on the issue. And I'm not saying he could have prevented the Great Depression, but certainly his policies led to the Great Depression, and it's very disappointing that Herbert Hoover did not do anything to address the corrupt banking institutions and the super monopolies which are going around, and he did very little trust busting, and yeah, he could have helped prevent the Great Depression, but he dragged his feet and did not. FDR is next. B plus president. FDR. I first need to discuss the elephant in the room. So the elephant in the room was the Japanese internment camps, which is one of the most disgusting things in U.S. history. But at the same time, it was a wartime provision and arguably necessary for the protection of the country. I disagree, but I mean, you can argue that. But FDR did a lot of things in addressing the Great Depression, and he was a 4-term president, but I don't agree with his methods, but certainly you have to agree with him being a good president. He was the stabilizing force the United States needed. He would do what's called the fireside chats, where he would go on the radio and just talk to the American people directly, which was which was something that was unheard of for a president to do at the time. He created government jobs. He through things like the Tennessee Valley Authority, which started to stabilize the country. In During the Great Depression, he started to get rid of the Hoovervilles, which were the shanty towns, which were being built because of the Great Depression. I think it's funny they're called Hoovervilles because it just shows how shitty of a president Herbert Hoover was. But yeah, he was also the president who led the United States through World War II. He was a stabilizing figure then, and despite not being able to walk. Um, he was still seen as an excellent leader at that time. Let's see. Just trying to think like what else on the top of my head. It's he was a good president, and I don't agree with many of his political stances, but you have to agree that he got the job done, and that's what we needed at the time, and um, it got it done. And I also enjoy that he didn't just jump head on into a European war with World War II. He waited to be attacked by the Japanese in Pearl Harbor, but he also did what was a very intelligent thing to do, and he did the Germany first policy, which meant that Germany would be the number one threat in World War II, and then they would worry about Japan. So because the Germany first policy, we were able to quell Hitler's regime and eventually liberate Europe. And that could all be thanks to FDR. So then we have FDR's vice president, which was Harry S. Truman. So again, we have a president dying in office with FDR, and unlike a lot of people, I think that Harry S. Truman was a good president. He, even though it was at the tail end of the war, he got the United States through the tail end of World War One. I mean World War Two, and he also made the decision to use atomic weapons on Japan during World War Two. So a lot of people think that this was a controversial and almost cruel thing to do, but I completely disagree with that notion. The fact is that if we were going to do a mainland invasion of Japan, we would have lost millions and millions of American life. Conservative estimates have at the time had 500,000 U.S. casualties if we went, and that's just the United States. That doesn't take into account the Soviets or the Japanese civilians or the Japanese soldiers, which would be killed in a mainland invasion of Japan. And the fact is that the Japanese were going to stop at nothing to defend their land. There were members of the Japanese militaristic parties that wanted them to continue to fight despite having two atomic bombs dropped on them. Do you really think that they would stop the fight if we didn't use the atomic bombs? Like they were getting carpet bombed for years because of the Americans. And Harry S. Truman made the difficult but correct decision in dropping the atomic bomb, and we have to commend him for that because dropping that sort of power on the world is a controversial thing to do. But yeah, I'm very glad he did it, and it sucks, but it was a necessary evil. So yeah. Where's like another B-list president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Obviously, he was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe during World War II, but he's also a very good individual in promoting peace in the United States. He wanted to lower the tensions of the Cold War. Ike made excellent decisions, especially during the Korean War, and one of those decisions was to one of his generals was demanding that he drop an atomic bomb on Korea, and Dwight D. Eisenhower had the level-headedness to say, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to drop an atomic bomb on Korea. And if he would have listened to that, Ike would have basically set the precedent that dropping atomic bombs is okay, especially in proxy wars. And he helped lower the tensions of the Cold War because of his of the wiseness he showed there. So I'm very glad that Dwight D. Eisenhower was in charge at that time. JFK. It's another sort of biased pick, but I think JFK was a very good president. but he was the youngest president and definitely the best looking president. He had the affair with Marilyn Monroe, who was like the sex symbol at the time. So props to him. I would bang Marilyn Monroe if I was able to bang Marilyn Monroe. I hope my girlfriend doesn't see this, but yeah, he also helped lead us through the Cuban Missile Crisis. Obviously, the Bay of Pigs invasion was kind of a national embarrassment, but the Cuban Missile Crisis was when the United States first put missiles in Turkey, which was very close to the Russian border. So in retaliation, the the Russians started to strike up a deal with Fidel Castro to put nuclear missiles in Cuba. JFK did an excellent job of not overreacting to that situation, because if JFK would have overreacted to that situation, he would have started a nuclear war, and he prevented a nuclear war. This wasn't like Ike, who had the option. He was literally, the Russians could strike us at any time, and if he was aggressive, if he was too much of a war hawk, we likely would not be sitting here today, and that could all be attributed to John F. Kennedy. And the deal eventually they immediately get rid of missiles in Cuba, and as a result, the United States in a few months would get rid of the missiles in Turkey. This stuff got declassified actually a couple years ago, but it's pretty fascinating to read about. But yeah, other than that, he did some great stuff when it came to civil rights. He wrote to Martin Luther King when he was in prison, which was a big thing at the time, showing direct support for African Americans and their struggle for civil rights. So he was a good president when it came to that. Yeah, he was a good president overall. I don't remember if it was him or Lyndon B. Johnson, but I believe JFK forced Governor Wallace of Alabama to get rid of. He sent federal troops to allow African American students to attend school in Alabama, and George Wallace was an infamous racist who believed in segregation. He said segregation now, segregation today, segregation always, in his speech, and he ran for president as a third party, but that's besides the point. But yeah, JFK, very good president, and very, very sad that he died at such a young age, and it's very tragic that Lee Harvey Oswald did that. Lyndon B. Johnson, where is he? There he is. LBJ, I don't know. I truly don't know. B plus. Lyndon B. Johnson. I think he's best known for creating the interstate highway system, and which was a huge deal at the time. But I also don't like how he kind of blackmailed states with interstate highway funding, which is just seem to me is a direct violation of states' autonomy. But that's besides the point. Right now, another thing about LBJ, which is very, very cool, is that he was the president who was in charge when the moon landing happened. So that's another big Cold War Cold War accomplishment. And also, he was the president who signed the Civil Rights Act. So those are two very, very important things in U.S. history, which happened under LBJ's rule. The reason why I'm hesitant to put him as high as he is just because of how he kind of dragged on the Vietnam War. He promoted what's known as the domino theory, which stated that that if Southeast Asia fell, then it could lead to other countries. So, for instance, if Vietnam fell, well, then that would lead to Laos and Cambodia falling to communism, and then that would lead to the Philippines and Indonesia, and then some not radical Red Scare proponents said that, oh, this could even lead to a communist India, and then it could lead to a communist Australia. It's just crazy stuff going on. But yeah, that's the issues I have with LBJ, was just his insistence on continuing the Vietnam struggle. But at the same time, like, other presidents continued. JFK had troops in Vietnam. Nixon had troops in Vietnam. But yeah, Richard Nixon goes without saying. F tier president. It's pretty easy for me to put him there, but I will say some good stuff about Nixon right now. I promise. I promise. I promise. I will say some good stuff about Nixon. Okay, starting off, Nixon. He was best known for improving relations with China. So prior to Nixon's administration, the United States and China basically had no interactions with one another since basically the Boxer Rebellion, which happened in the 1800s. And so when we carved up China into autonomous zones and stuff. But yeah, he started to open relations with the Communist Party in China, which was seen as a good move at the time, especially because China was a communist government, and there was concerns that China could turn into another Russia. So that kind of eased the Cold War tensions with Nixon, but it also ensured that Russia and China wouldn't create an alliance which could be used to attack the United States. That is a good thing. Nixon also led to the creation of free kidney dialysis for those who could not afford it. So prior to Nixon becoming president, if you had kidney failure, you would go to what's called a death committee, and they would basically rule whether you are allowed to live or not. And Nixon ended that precedent there. So that was another good thing that Nixon did. Now let's get to the bad stuff. Nixon was corrupt as corrupt can come, and this corruption could be led all the way back to when he initially ran for president against JFK. He would have spies on JFK's campaign, but the Watergate scandal, Nixon finally got caught, and as a result, he was the first president and the only president to resign from office because it was basically a foregone conclusion that he was going to get impeached. He claimed that he wasn't a crook, and that's crap, he was. But yeah, Nixon was a total crook. I just think his paranoia and his other issues got the best of him, and as a result, Nixon lost the presidency, which he always wanted. Another funny fact: him and JFK were in the first ever televised debate, and Nixon was sweating profusely during the whole debate, and everyone just thought that he was going to be an unstable figure. And I think it's just really hilarious that JFK, obviously a good-looking guy, would benefit deeply from a televised debate, and Nixon foolishly had one. Another funny story about Nixon is he would swim naked a lot in these pools, and one time he requested like a media interview with a bunch of political reporters to talk about the campaign, and yeah, he did that media interview swimming in basically his underwear, and then he just didn't even talk to him. He just like dried himself off and walked off. There you go. That's I probably just spent way too much time on Richard Nixon, but there you go. Richard Nixon. Gerald Ford, another D-list president. So Gerald Ford, excuse me, let me stretch for a bit. Gerald Ford is the only president in United States history not to be elected. And what do I mean by that? So Nixon's previous vice president was a man named Spiro Agnew. And Spiro Agnew got kicked out of office for a separate corruption scandal. So Spiro Agnew was out, and as a result, Nixon needed to pick a new vice president. Well, he already won the election, and he picked Gerald Ford to be his vice president. This is another one of these situations where no one was expecting Gerald Ford to even sniff the presidency, and overnight, this man with very little experience became president. But Gerald Ford, he's best known for being a football player and serving in the Navy. Yeah, he tried to improve relationships with the Soviet Union. They kind of failed, sort of. But yeah, the big issue with Gerald Ford is that as soon as Nixon resigned as president, Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon, and that was seen as really controversial because he's basically giving Nixon immunity because of his power. If Nixon did the things that Nixon did to as anyone else in the country, he'd be put in jail. But Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon, which was just seen as direct corruption. But some have argued that this was actually a good thing, considering the fact that this would have just prolonged the Watergate scandal, and the nation really just needed to heal. But Ford lost, seen as a corrupt individual, and we got rid of those. Jimmy Carter. So the thing with Jimmy Carter is that people really just wanted someone who just wouldn't lie to them. And he was a peanut farmer. He was a youth minister from Georgia, and he was just seen as like a really nice guy. And well, the nice guy mentality didn't lead him to very much political prominence, I will say. The issues with Jimmy Carter is that Jimmy Carter did have some accomplishments. The Camp David Accords are one that sticks out in my mind, which were negotiations with Egypt and Israel to have peace, which was a huge deal at the time because most of the Arab world hated Israel and they wanted nothing to do with the Israelis. But yeah, that's basically a big accomplishment. But the issue with Jimmy Carter is he had the Iran hostage crisis, which he was unable to successfully get those hostages back. Actually, one of the things that that Iran said was they waited intentionally for Ronald Reagan to be inaugurated into office just so Jimmy Carter would not get the credit for bringing the hostages home. He also tried to do way too much for foreign governments, and he tried to promote human rights everywhere, but in many of these places it just failed epically. So really nice guy. He's still living today, so if you're seeing this video, Jimmy Carter, shout out to you. You're probably the nicest president in American history, but unfortunately you had some tough luck when you're president. I'm pretty sure he installed solar panels on the White House at one point as well, but those got like torn down by Reagan or someone. I can't remember the details, but it's pretty funny. Ronald Reagan, political bias alert. Yes, I am a Republican. This is why Ronald Reagan is so high on my list. You've caught me, everyone. Ronald Reagan, his efforts to reduce government regulation and spending were, though controversial at the time, it led to economic boom. Reagan is seen as probably one of the most prolific political figures of our lifetime, and that's all because of his efforts to ensure that the presidency was able to help stimulate the economy. And Reaganomics, though a lot of people say they don't work, I think they personally work. But yeah, he cut regulation, cut spending, and he gave America a new heart, which they deeply needed after all the terrible, corrupt U.S. presidents which were there before. So yep, that was cool of Reagan. I think Reagan's an excellent president, and the evidence kind of supports that. So go Reagan, B plus. I was thinking about putting him higher, but there's no way I could get away and justify putting him higher. HW was another good president. And I think that HW kind of got screwed by God, what's his name? Fuck. Shit. What is his name? This is gonna kill me. Who was the third party candidate? Oh my God. Okay, so he ran against Bill Clinton, and another candidate was, oh my God, this is gonna absolutely kill me. 1992 presidential election. Sorry, I will get to it in a second. Ross Perot screwed over George H.W. Bush. So, George H.W., he did an excellent job in quelling the Saddam Hussein in the Gulf War, and he did probably the most A-plus job of any U.S. president in history when it came to a war in the Middle East. He got in, he kicked Saddam Hussein's ass, and he liberated Kuwait, and he created an international coalition to do it. He became a very, very popular wartime president. The issue was Ross Perot, which was a Texas billionaire. He ran for president in 1992, along with Bill Clinton, who was kind of seen as like an inexperienced governor of Arkansas at the time, but that's besides the point. So Ross Perot was a very conservative, and he swayed votes away from George H.W. Bush. So H.W. probably would have won and continued on with Reagan's legacy if it wasn't for Ross Perot. So good job, Ross Perot. You kind of screwed over HW and F tier Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is the type of guy you would have a beer with. I think Bill Clinton's a very cool guy, but at the same time, Bill Clinton kind of showed that he was never meant to be president. So I already mentioned how it was pretty fluky how he won the election. Prior to winning the Democratic nomination, Bill Clinton was seen as kind of a dark horse sort of presidential candidate, as he was seen as like an inexperienced governor from Arkansas, and there's HW's popularity was crazy. His support was like 80% at one point. It was just ridiculous. He was so popular, especially after the Gulf War. So nobody gave Bill Clinton a chance. But because Ross Perot swayed so many Republican votes, Bill Clinton was able to beat George H.W. Bush. And it's not to say H.W. didn't have some issues on his own. For instance, H.W. Was seen checking his watch during a presidential debate. And when asked about an issue about the economy in regards to it wasn't a full recession, it was more kind of like a panic that was going on at the time. HW didn't relate to the voter very much. He was just like, what? And Bill Clinton had a very famous cool line where he said he's from a small state, and as someone from a small state, when someone gets unemployed, it affects him directly because he knows them. And HW just couldn't relate to that because he came from money and all of that. But let's get to why he sucks. The second president in United States history to be impeached. He lied under oath with the Monica Lewinsky scandal. He claimed that he did not have any sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. In reality, he did. But that ended up being a crippling thing. He also big sex addict, and he was seen as a cool president. You see him like with a saxophone or whatever, but at the same time, Bill Clinton certainly deserves most of the heat that he's gotten. That's why he's in the F tier. Almost done. What is it? Joe Biden's not on the list, but I'll talk about him eventually. So we have other George Bush Jr., obviously the son of HW, but George Bush, I have some mixed feelings about George Bush. So on one hand, I think George Bush was what we needed during 9/11. He was seen as a stabilizing figure for the nation, and at the same time, he had some pretty good responses to 9/11, but simultaneously, some of his actions during 9/11, especially when it came to the Iraq War, in hindsight, were pretty terrible. Saddam Hussein was not building weapons of mass destruction, and as a result, the United States probably should not have been to Iraq. The war on terrorism probably should have stopped in Afghanistan. There's also the conspiracy theories behind like who is really in charge. Was Dick Cheney in charge? I don't really want to dig into that rabbit hole, but some of the stuff that happened in his presidency was the Patriot Act, which I do not agree with. The creation, or at least the emboldenment of the NSA to privately look at our phone calls and our text messages. I'm very, very against, but I also not the biggest fan of some of the crazy torture tactics which were used to, especially in places like Guantanamo Bay and then the other prisons to potential terrorists. Like we definitely tortured people, which I'm not for. But at the same time, George W. Bush was a good figure during 9/11, and I think he just did what he could at the time with the limited information built to him. People were mad and people wanted an answer. So therefore George W. basically gave him that answer. Okay, I might get fired for this. But in my opinion, Barack Obama has been the best president of my lifetime. And I'm a Republican saying that. So my opinion on Barack Obama is, though I don't agree with him politically on a lot of stuff, is he did a lot of good things for the United States, especially during the Great Recession. So I'm not going to blame the Great Recession on the Bush administration. It really can be blamed on corrupt banking, but Barack Obama did some good things, like the Affordable Care Act. It gave health care to millions of Americans who needed health care. And prior to that, it was kind of crazy that so many Americans were uninsured and could pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for health care insurance. Another thing that Barack Obama did is that he was the president when gay marriage became legalized in the United States, which is another big step for marriage equality throughout the country. I'm very glad that Barack Obama didn't drag his heels and try to prevent that, despite campaigning that he was against gay marriage. Another thing that President Obama did while in office was he was president when the United States killed Osama bin Laden, so he continued Bush's push to end terrorism, and terrorism has certainly been in shambles since Obama was president. He also just seems like a cool guy in general. He played basketball. Seemed like a very athletic president. He just seemed like someone that represented the nation well. I don't agree with him politically, but compared to what came followed, Barack Obama was a good president, and I don't have too much bad things to say about him. Even though I'm supposed to hate Obama, I really can't help but admire the man, considering he's the first African American president. He broke barriers for a whole racial group, and I really admire that about him. But yeah, I don't like him politically, but very, very good, and he's what the nation needed. Okay, I also might get fired for this. I did not like Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump was a terrible president. I'm not a never Trump Republican, but at the same time, I agreed with most of his policies, but the way he did it was just very unpresidential, and he did not seem like what we needed for a president, and that was very disappointing to me that Trump was so poor. I voted for Trump. Do I regret it? No, because I think Biden is worse. Yeah, I'll reveal it now. I put Biden in the F tier as well. So you can just imagine Joe Biden right here alongside Donald Trump. But yeah, you can see I'm not very hot on many of the presidents that we've had in our lifetime. But oh, there's a garage. But yeah, Donald Trump, I really don't like as president, and as you can see, he's gonna be in my F tier. But that's it, y'all. That's my presidential tier list. As always, thank you again, and remember to like and subscribe for more content. I'm so close to being able to monetize the channel. I'm so close. So please make sure you share this video with everyone, just so we can try to get to our goal and be able to monetize ASAP. We literally need like 100 people to watch this video from start to finish, and we can monetize the channel. I think that's very possible, and a very likely goal that we can try to achieve. But thank you as always. Happy New Year's. Happy 2023. Let me know if you get a New Year's kiss in the comment section below. I hope everyone of my viewers was able to get a New Year's kiss from someone. And I guess my biggest advice to everyone is, if you're scared to talk to her, just talk to her, or him if you're gay. I don't care. But yeah, thanks guys. Have a great day. Bye.